does Pitt need to do to have a consistent top 20 recruiting class? What's the latest on quarterback recruiting? Who's a breakout player to watch this season? And what meal would I eat if I had to eat the same meal every day? All that and more in today's Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I don't know about that last question. We'll see if we get to it there. Coach Steve Panther asked that question in the mailbag on Panther-Lair.com. We'll see if I get to it. He asked it last week, or they asked it last week, and I think reiterated it this week. And I don't think I answered it last week, but if we get to it, we'll get to it. This is the Morning Pitt Mailbag, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak here with you on a Friday, 7/7/23. Is the date on the calendar, and we made it to the end of the week. You know the deal here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. These Morning Pitt videos, including the mailbag edition on Fridays. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett talk about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. We have recruit interviews, player interviews, coach interviews, practice highlights, prospect videos, all kinds of stuff that if you're a Pitt fan, you're going to want to check out right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, and that way you won't miss any of it. And then, of course, the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You'll find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. The best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find is right there at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Friday. You know what we like to do on a Friday? It's the mailbag edition. We take questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, the Between Fifth and Forbes premium message board. We take questions throughout the week. People post them there, and then we answer as many as we can right here in the mailbag. And we got some great questions this week, so rather than delay, we'll just jump right into it. And the first question, this is a great place to start. NC Panther says, in your view, what is the single reason that best explains Pitt's inability to consistently have top 20 recruiting classes? We seemingly have everything in place. Great facilities, the last 3 years with 14 NFL draft picks, the stability with the coaching staff, NIL money, recent success, and great fans. Yes, I understand the yellow seats, but the West Virginia and ACC championship game, tremendous fans, and a great stadium to play in. I don't understand what's holding us back. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, you listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things, right? Great facilities, draft picks in the last 3 years, stability with the coaching staff, NIL money, the on-field success in the last 2 years, the fans, and the stadium. So that's 7 things, all right? 1, 2, at least 3 of those things, if not 4, are all really recent. Like in the last 24 months, maybe 36 months if you want to go over the last, the last 24 months or so is what we're talking about, because you get 3 drafts basically, I guess, in the last 25 or 26 months. So the 3 drafts you're talking about where Pitt's had, more than a dozen guys picked, 14 guys picked, what is it? What do we say? That was tied for 10th most or tied for 10th nationally. That all happened in the last 25, 26 months. 20 wins over the last 2 seasons all happened in the last 2 years. Even NIL money, the advent of NIL money is still something of a recent development. And when you talk about coaching staff stability, yes, Pat Narduzzi has been here for 8 years, but this is only, I think, maybe the second time he's gone through an offseason and not had any coaching changes. So even that's something that's sort of relatively new. If you want to say that, well, Narduzzi being here for 8 years kind of creates a stability in and of itself, fine. But those other 3 things, the draft success, the on-field success, and the NIL, that's all relatively recent. So when you're talking about having a consistently being in the top 20 recruiting classes, a lot of the things you're talking about are rather recent developments. And I don't think there's really a big enough sample size of time to say, wow, they should be finishing in the top 20 recruiting classes, because, and a few people in the mailbag thread pointed this out in response to this question, when you get before the last 3 years or so, you've got a Coastal Championship in 2018, a bunch of 8-win seasons, a couple 8-win seasons, before that for Narduzzi in 15 and 16. You've got 4 straight years of 6-win regular seasons from 2011 through 2014. You've got Dave Wanstead sort of peaking in 2009 with 10 wins. And that was the first time since the early 80s that they won 10 games in a season. So you want to consistently be in the top 20 recruiting classes. You need to consistently win and consistently be relevant and consistently be ranked and consistently be one of the prominent programs nationally, programs that are relevant to the national conversation, programs that are being discussed and being paid attention to. Because for a large portion of time over whatever span you want to pick, say just this century, 2000 through 2023, for a significant portion of that, there wasn't a whole lot of relevance with this football program. The Larry Fitzgerald years, certainly entering 2003, there was a fair amount of relevance there. 2009, there was a significant amount of relevance. I think they carried some relevance into the 2008 season on the strength of the 13-9 game, but that fell apart pretty quickly when they lost to Bowling Green, despite ending up as a 9-win team that year. 2009, they had relevance, particularly heading toward those final 2 games of the regular season after they beat Notre Dame. I mean, they were a top 10 team in the BCS rankings. I mean, you are nationally relevant at that point. They lose a kind of meaningless game to West Virginia, at least in terms of the standings, but it doesn't help you at all when you don't win that game. And then, what happened after that with the Cincinnati game. So, they flirted with relevance there. 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, they weren't relevant. They were not part of the national conversation when it comes to college football. 2015, 2016, save for the upset win over. They had a couple wins that were part of the national conversation in 2016, but as a program, they never really sustained that. And then 2017, you have the win over Miami, one game that has some national relevance for you. 2018, they win the Coastal, but you're not really getting all that noticed for doing that. 19, 20, pretty unremarkable seasons. 8-5 and 6-5. Or 2021, absolutely. And I think 2022, they kept themselves in that as being a ranked team for most of the season. They started and ended the season as a ranked team. They fell out for a little while there, but they managed to claw their way back in. And so if you want to consistently be one of the top 20 recruiting teams, have one of the top 20 recruiting classes, you need to consistently be one of the top 20 programs in the nation. And they haven't done that consistently. They need to keep building on what they've done the last 2 years. You can't fall back into 3 years in a row of 8-5. It's okay, but that's not going to get it done, and your recruiting is not going to pick up as a result. They're building, and I think their recruiting this year has been better than it was last year, and I think it was better last year than a lot of people give it credit for. I think they're building slowly and progressively on the success that they've had, and they're translating that into some recruiting success. But it has to keep building because the program, they were not part of the national conversation, and they're not a blue blood that's just sort of automatically going to jump back into that conversation. If they struggle for a few years, but then they have one good year, or they don't even need one good year. They just need the hype of one year. Look at Texas every year, or look at Miami every year. All of a sudden, they're part of it. Everybody's talking about Miami. Everybody's talking about Texas. Usually before the season starts, because once the season starts, they remind everybody why they weren't talking about them before. Pitt's not in that position. Pitt has to earn every bit of recognition and relevance that it gets. And they're getting there. It's getting better, but they're not there yet. So they'll keep working at it. So, they have all the things you're talking about, NC Panther, but the things that are really the most important or things that can have a huge impact really are still sort of recent enough and need to be built on more in order for them to really translate into that consistent top 20 recruiting class that you're talking about. Kilbassier Dennis, again, one of the best usernames on the message board, says there's been some great discussion this week on the wide receivers and how paper thin the depth really is. Have you or Jim heard anything about any wide receivers left in the portal they may be contacting? Really can't be much left out there at this point, I wouldn't think. Yeah, it's July 7th now. We're less than a month away from the start of training camp. If you were going to get a guy, you would have had a guy. And there probably are some guys still floating around in the portal, but the time to do it was yesterday, 3 months ago, or 3 weeks ago, or 2 months ago, or 4 weeks ago, whatever it is. You needed to do it by now. And the fact that they haven't done it by now makes me think they're not going to do it. If they end up taking a guy 2 weeks from now, I just have to ask why. When you could have had him probably at the beginning of June. Whoever it is, whoever you can get on July 15th, you probably could have gotten on June 1st unless they weren't in the portal. But if they weren't in the portal by that point, unless it's a grad transfer, they couldn't play this year anyway. So if there's a grad transfer that you can get on July 15th, you probably could have gotten him on June 15th or June 1st, maybe even May 15th, in which case you should have done that so he could get as much time at the playbook to try and learn the offense as much if he's actually going to help you this year. Unfortunately, they haven't done that. Unfortunately, they didn't get Dante Cephas, and they didn't get Jaquay Jackson. They didn't get any of these other portal targets they were after other than Dejon Reynolds. And that's leaving them, as you say, rather thin at wide receiver heading into the season. Not much in the way of returning experience. I've talked about this all week. I've written about it all week. I mean, you guys have seen it. I'm sure you've been reading it. I'm sure you watched the Morning Pit on, I think it was Wednesday when I went long on the wide receivers talking about that situation. On the live show on Wednesday night, we talked about it a lot. It's thin. It's 3 guys and then a bunch of unproven players. 10 scholarship wide receivers on the roster this season. 6 of them are either true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. None of them have actually seen the field. And the only, outside of the top 3 guys of Mumfield, Means, and Reynolds, the only upperclassman, the only other returning player at receiver is a converted defensive back who's played 3 snaps on offense, which is still more than all 6 of those freshmen have actually played. So yeah, maybe they'll find somebody that they can add, but you have to really temper your expectations, I think, when it comes to trying to say, well, if they get somebody, boy, they could do this or they could do that. I'm real angry. Says Chris, who are your picks? That wasn't me finishing my thoughts on the wide receivers and saying I'm real angry. Although I think certainly if you've probably read or listened to stuff I've said about the receivers this week, you might think I'm angry about it. But no, that's a username on the board. I'm real angry. Says, Chris, who are your picks for players that have not seen playing time yet that could have a breakout year? My number 1 pick would be Sean Fitzsimmons. I like that pick. The only thing that might hold Fitzsimmons back from a breakout year is that there's still a lot of upperclassmen ahead of him. Now, I think probably the response to that would be, I don't want to see Sean Fitzsimmons get held back by Devin Danielson, Tyler Bentley, and David Green. Yes, those guys have been around for, this will be their 6th year now. And no, they haven't produced a whole lot in the last 5 years, but they're still going to play a lot. And, and it's really about that 4th spot behind those guys or in addition to those guys. And whether that's Fitzsimmons or it's Elliott Donald or DeAndre Jules or Isaiah Neal, the freshman, I think Fitzsimmons is going to be a great player for Pitt. I think he's going to make a huge impact. I think he's going to be a playmaker. It's just a question of how much opportunity he's going to get this year. I think he'll get on the field. I think he'll play. And I imagine he'll make some big plays. But his consistent regular playing time might have to wait until next season. I would also probably look at the safeties a little bit. I know that Javon McIntyre and P.J. O'Brien played last year. I mean, McIntyre played quite a bit, particularly at the end of the season. But even a guy like Stephon Hall, I think Steph Hall is going to play a bunch for this defense. Donovan McMillan is less of an unknown, but and he'll probably be on the field a lot. But I think Steph Hall is going to play a lot, and I think he's going to show people that, wow, he's actually a pretty good player. I kept hearing that, because he was in that same recruiting class as McMillan, that 2021 recruiting class, that COVID recruiting class that was a curious group, to say the least, and we'll look back on that more as time passes. But he was part of that class, and those were the 2 prominent safety prospects in Western PA. McMillan certainly got a lot more of the attention than Hall did, but I kept hearing from people that Hall was every bit the player that McMillan was, that Hall was going to be really good when he got to college, and I always kind of said, oh, okay, we'll see. I can't exactly stake my reputation on that, given the offer sheet differences between Hall and McMillan. But I kept hearing good things about Hall as a recruit coming out of Central Valley, And I've heard a lot of good things about him entering this season. So he would be a guy that I would probably circle maybe even ahead of some of the defensive linemen. And there are going to be some new guys playing up front. But I think Stephon Hall, I think will have a big season. He might be a starter, he might be a reserve, but I think he'll play a lot and play well for Pitt at safety. Coastie Panther, so this is who I referenced. He said, this is what he said this week. I still like my food question from last week. What can I say? I like food, and it's a nice change of pace from the 35 different variations of the question. How well can we do if the quarterback doesn't suck this year? So Coastie Panther's question last week was, if you could only have one meal for breakfast, one meal for lunch, and one meal for dinner, 3 different meals, but you had to have the same breakfast every day, the same lunch every day, the same dinner every day, which would it be? And I'm taking this just because I shouldn't assume male, even though it's a significant portion of our readership and viewership here. But they came back to the thread. They posted the question last week, and they came back and posted it again this week. So I figure I should give a shout out there. I'll tell you, breakfast, I like a simple breakfast, banana, some peanut butter and raisins, and some yogurt on the side, with some kind of mix in, usually some granola or something. I'm pretty content with that. I kind of do eat that every day, to be honest. Lunch, I could eat a good hoagie for lunch every day, a good sub, some good bread, and, ham and cheese, ham and salami and cheese, whatever, take your pick of the meats, something classic like that. Dinner's tough for me, though, because you pick whatever your dinner meal is going to be. I'm going to get sick of it at some point. I think it would have to be something with a lot of variety, like a salad with meat. I mean, that might be the move, like a salad with meat, a steak salad, a chicken salad. That might be what I would have to do just to give myself, a chance of actually eating it every day. Because if it's something a little too basic, or sort of empirical, I guess, I think you would burn out on it. So maybe like a good Pittsburgh chicken salad, with the fries and the chicken. And actually, that would be the way to go. Now that I'm thinking about it, a Pittsburgh style chicken salad. So lettuce, tomato, cucumber. Just put some egg on there, some fries, some mozzarella cheese, some chicken. And then, your dressing, I'd probably go with a homemade ranch or something. And so you do that because one day you're eating a salad. The next day you're eating a plate after you move it all around with your fork, where you've got chicken, you've got French fries, and you've got some green. And so you can almost have different meals while still having the same meal. So maybe I found a technicality, a way to get around it. God bless Pittsburgh for her salads. Let's see. Pitman 2003 says one of the positives about Cignetti we heard is that he supposedly liked to recruit unlike Whipple. Has he been active? And if so, has he been the lead guy on anyone? Well, yeah, he's been active. I think he's been out on the road at least as much as Mark Whipple, if not more so. He likes to go out on the road. He likes to recruit, or at least, that's what I've known him to be. I think he does go out and see kids. Quarterbacks are still the primary focus. I don't know if he necessarily has a geographic region. You would say, well, he's the lead recruiter for this guy or that guy. He's the lead recruiter for the quarterbacks primarily. And then I think he will, on prominent offensive targets, receivers, tight ends, backs, linemen, whatever it is, he'll go along on some of those visits, I think. But yeah, I think he's still a really active recruiter. And again, quarterbacks, which, you can insert your joke here if you feel like the quarterback recruiting has been subpar, but that's his focus. Belzik927 says, what role do you see for Malcolm Epps? Could his role as a pass catcher be increased due to our lack of options at wide receiver? So I'm going to look him up again, because Jim Hammett and I were talking about Malcolm Epps Wednesday night on the live show. And just looking at his Texas and USC stats, I mean, 5 seasons, admittedly only one game in one of those seasons. So let's even just look at 5 seasons, 37 catches, 483 yards, 7 touchdowns. Now, he had 1 catch for 18 yards as a freshman. So, you look at really the last 4 seasons after he redshirted, you're looking at about 36 catches, 465 yards, and 7 touchdowns, averaging probably a little less than 13 yards per catch. Just not a prominent role for him. He caught 20 passes his redshirt freshman year at Texas. And then his high mark after that at USC in 2021, he had 10 catches for 173 yards and 1 touchdown. And it wasn't even a matter of injuries the other years. This past year, he played in 14 games and had 3 catches for 18 yards. 2 of those 3 were touchdowns, but not a lot there. It's not something he's shown himself to be able to do. It's not a role that he's shown himself to be, I don't want to say capable of playing, but it's not a role he's been in the past. Now, that being said, in 2 years at Florida, Lucas Krull had 9 catches for 108 yards and no touchdowns before he came to Pitt. Now, at Pitt, he played 1 game. In 2020, he played 1 game and caught 1 pass for 6 yards, but 2021, he had 38 catches, 451 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Roughly Malcolm Epps' career production Lucas Krull had that year, but Krull didn't have those kind of numbers prior to getting to Pitt. He wasn't used in that kind of role. Now, I'm not saying that Epps can become what Krull was. I'm not saying that Epps is the player that Krull was. And I don't want to draw that comparison, but I guess I just bring it up to say I'm not going to totally write him off because he hasn't done it so far. I'm not going to totally write him off just based on his lack of production thus far in his college career. But I'm also not going to go into the season counting on it. And we've talked a lot about how Epps could fit in, and maybe he could play more of the inline tight end role and allow Gavin Bartholomew to work more in the backfield or as an H-back or a fullback, which is a lot of what he did in 2021 and a lot of what contributed to his success, where his average depth of target was literally less than 2 yards per target. But he ended up catching like 28 out of 29 passes. And he caught 7 more passes than he did last year, despite having 7 more targets last year. He was a much more effective tight end weapon 2 years ago when his usage was quite different from what it was last season. But his usage changed last season, I think, because, granted, there was a different offensive coordinator, and that's a big part of it. But I think another part of the reason his usage changed is because there wasn't another player like Krull. Bartholomew became the number 1 tight end because there was no Krull to fill sort of that other role. If you're going to use tight ends in that fashion again, maybe Epps can be the guy who is in that primary tight end role, allowing Bartholomew to have something closer to what he did in 2021, which might lead to more success. I don't know. Again, you're talking about a couple of variables here. One is that the offensive coordinator changed. 2 is that I don't know if Malcolm Epps is going to be what Lucas Krull was. And so maybe it doesn't work like that at all. But if it's not Epps, I don't know who it could be that could fill that role. I don't think Carter Johnson is that kind of player. And I don't know if Jake Renda is ready to be that kind of player. And other than that, there's Cole Mitchell. There's not a lot of tight ends on this roster to choose from. So if anybody's going to step into that role, it almost has to be Malcolm Epps, or it's going to be Gavin Bartholomew again. And then we'll see how that goes. All right, we passed the 20-minute mark. We do have some more questions left, so I'm going to save those for next week. We appreciate everybody who contributed to the mailbag. It's always fun to have these conversations and let you guys participate and ask the questions like that. Is what I like doing on Wednesday night during the live show when you guys get in the chat screen. That's what I like doing on these Friday mailbag editions of the Morning Pit. So thank you to everyone who contributed questions. If we didn't get your question this week, we will get it next week, and we'll take more in advance of that as well. So while you're here, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then head over to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, to get all of the Pitt sports news. Thanks so much for a great week here with the Morning Pit. Thanks for tuning in every day. I hope you had a great week. Hope you have a great Friday. Let's coast into the weekend, right? Enjoy it. Have a great weekend. We'll be back with you on Monday for another Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.